A new dash cam utilizing sensors and video AI aimed to increase safety and coach drivers has hit the market. American Trucking Associations and the ATA's Technology and Maintenance Council gear up to host their 4th annual National Technician Appreciation Week. And surprise, surprise, those high diesel prices could be hanging around for quite some time. And you'll never guess which state had the highest price in the continental U.S. It's California. It's always California. We'll cover all that, plus your monthly updates and latest search and driver trends, freight data, and spot rates. And of course, we'll hear from our friend Jason Miller to get his latest economic update. For Randall Reilly, I'm Joshua Miller, and this is the 30-Day Reset. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us. We're back here each and every month with the latest recruiting data, a few news stories, and an economic update. Everything we'll be talking about today is covered in this month's download, and it goes into a little more detail in some of the areas that we don't really have time to dive into deep here on the show. So if you want your copy of all the numbers, news stories, and more, you can get it down below. If you like our little show here, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us get out there and reach more people. Now, let's get to why you're here. First up, Trucking by the Numbers, brought to you by Stratus Strategize. Recruiting costs continue to drop, and we're reaching levels not seen since the first few months of the pandemic, way back in 2020. Internet searches for truck driver jobs in August were very high, while only half as many jobs were posted as compared to a year ago. It's this kind of activity that is helping drive those low costs throughout the hiring funnel. Search's CPC for August is up 2% from July's record low, while the Facebook CPC is at its second lowest point since July of 2020, with only last month's CPC coming in lower. Overall average CPL is now at its most favorable since April 2020, and it looks like there's still plenty of drivers out there actively searching for new opportunities. The search activity for August looks like it could end up being the second highest number on record, only behind April of 2022. Now for some freight and spot rate numbers. It appears that the freight market has finally found its floor, but the recent monthly trends don't really line up with historical trend data. For instance, June is typically the strongest month for volume before dropping off a little bit in July. However, this year the volume dropped in June, only to increase again in July. The overall spot rates declined, but refrigerated saw a nice gain, while load volumes were up in the Midwest, Southeast, and Mountain Central regions, but declined everywhere else. Total load activity remained flat in comparison to the previous week, but was down 25% year over year and 29% to the 5-year average. Dry van loads inched up by just a little bit, a little under 0.5%. Refrigerated loads actually rose by 7%, and flatbeds dipped by 2%. And as the overall load averages, each of these segments were down year over year, as well as well under the 5-year averages. For spot rates, overall numbers were down by a cent compared to the previous week, which puts the rates 13% below the same time last year and 4% below the 5-year average. Dry van and flatbed rates saw decreases of 1 cent and 3 cents respectively, but refrigerated increased by 7 cents per mile week over week. And although there were lots of declines and each segment was down compared to year over year and 5-year average, since late June and Labor Day, recent moves have exceeded seasonal expectations. For a full breakdown of all the year over year and 5-year average numbers, you can check this month's download. And again, that's available down below. Now, let's get to this month's headlines. Teletrac Navman is now offering an AI-powered dual-camera dash cam, the IQ camera. The system integrates with Teletrac Navman's TN360 fleet management software and uses sensors and video AI to review every minute of drive time to understand behavior. The camera pulls driver performance data in a single location, allowing fleet managers to get a better understanding of driving performance and identify areas for improvement. The system also boasts advanced driver assistance and driver status monitoring with features like forward collision, tailgating, distracted driving, and drowsy driving, providing real-time feedback to drivers. The 4th annual National Technician Appreciation Week, hosted by the American Trucking Associations and the ATA's Technology and Maintenance Council, is set for September 24th through the 30th. The goal is to provide an opportunity to celebrate the hard work and commitment of professional technicians and help attract prospective talent to one of the most in-demand careers in the industry. TMC Executive Director Robert Braswell had this to say: "Technicians are part of the backbone of the trucking industry. Without them making sure vehicles are ready for service and in safe condition, drivers could not make the deliveries we rely on. This is the perfect time for our industry and the general public to show their appreciation and say thank you to these important individuals and the valuable work they do." And finally, it looks like we're in for high gas prices for the foreseeable future. Diesel prices continue to climb, and we may not have even seen the highest prices yet. Lower oil imports, a halt to output to the strategic oil reserve, and slower refinery production are all factors in the climbing prices. Prices are high everywhere, but California is worse off than any other state, with an average price of $5.74 per gallon of diesel as of this filming. Gas Buddy's head of petroleum analysis, Patrick DeHaan, also pointed out, as we get closer to the peak of hurricane season, any new issues could easily push the national average of gasoline over $4 per gallon for the first time in 2023. Drivers may want to brace for potentially higher prices yet. And on that happy note, that does it for this month's headlines. Now let's check in with Jason Miller to hear about his latest economic update. Hopefully it'll be better than the update on fuel prices. Take it away, Jason.
So as we're looking at the freight markets today and trying to understand where things are going to be moving over the coming months, one of the topics that has received a tremendous amount of attention over the past few weeks has been credit card debt, with the key thing being total credit card debt as measured by the New York Federal Reserve's Household Debt and Credit Survey crossed the $1 trillion mark for the first time. This has led to a lot of dire predictions that consumers are running out of spending power and the economy may tip into a recession. What I want to emphasize, though, is what credit card debt means in this instance is just the debt that appears on credit reports. So if you spend money on your credit card each month and you pay that off, that debt still shows up on your credit report, but it doesn't mean it's accruing interest. And so the challenge with total credit card debt is it doesn't consider two factors. One is the number of accounts that exist, so effectively the number of people using credit cards. And two, how does that debt compare to people's spending power? And so what I like to look at instead and put more weight on is what is the delinquency rate on credit cards? And also, how much are banks charging off for credit card debt? In other words, how much debt are they having to write off? So these data come from a different Federal Reserve Board program. And what we see through the second quarter of 2023 is that on the delinquency side, we have been seeing delinquencies rise over the past several quarters. For the second quarter, they actually did surpass where they were in 2019. They're about 2.77%. That is certainly a concerning data point and one that we need to be watching very closely. Now, it is worth emphasizing, though, that prior to the global financial crisis, we tended to see delinquency rates in the 4%. With delinquency going as high as 7% during the worst of the global financial crisis. Now, in terms of what banks are charging off, here we have a slightly different story, and that charge-off rates are actually below still where they were before COVID. And so that adds a little bit of complexity to this. And so one possibility is that consumers who previously didn't use credit cards but started doing so after COVID-19 hit and the ability to use cash in many settings was curtailed. We may be seeing some of these consumers run into issues, but the account balances may be a little smaller, which would explain the distinction between the delinquency rates and the charge-offs. So there is some troubling signs, but I do want to emphasize we're not looking at something yet that would appear to be global financial crisis-esque. So it's going to be something that we're going to be monitoring closely. Now, another key piece is we're talking, freight volumes apart from the consumer spending side is where's activity at in the wholesaling sector? So in other words, firms that are selling business to business but are not engaged in the transformation of some type of product, which would fall under manufacturing. So wholesalers account for about 30% of ton mileage that is transported by for-hire trucking companies. And what we see is that wholesaling activity exploded at around June of 2020 as we came out of the COVID pandemic, because a lot of wholesalers are very major importers. What we've seen, though, over the past 12 months is a cool down and now a contraction of inflation-adjusted wholesale sales. That pattern is shown on the right, where we look at year-over-year percent change in wholesale sales, tends to be very consistent with time periods that are freight recessions, 2015, 2016, 2019, and now the back half of 2022 and through 2023. So one of the key things that I'd be telling everybody to be monitoring closely is how are inflation adjusted wholesale sales moving? The Census Bureau publishes these data each month, and until we start to see a breakout from the current trough that we're in and start to see some steady year-over-year gains, it is very unlikely that we're going to be able to exit this freight recession. And another factor contributing to the softness of volumes right now has been a change in consumer spending patterns, and specifically a decrease in e-commerce sales as a percentage of retail trade sales, excluding motor vehicle and parts dealers, as well as gasoline stations, which are two subsectors where, parcel e-commerce shipments really aren't feasible. And what we can see here is over the last few quarters, we've seen a sharp decline in that statistic and in that ratio, till where we're actually now back to pre-COVID levels as implied by the trend line. So in other words, had COVID not happened, e-commerce activity today is where we would have expected it to be at relative to overall sales. Now, when we think what this means for freight volumes, this means less line haul movement in parcel carriers networks. This means less demand for paperboard and paperboard containers, so solid fiber boxes for those e-commerce shipments. It also means less plastic products because we don't need as many plastic mailers and plastic wrap and things of that sort. And so very likely another contributing factor in the decline of freight volumes has been more traditional, let's say, retailer DC to store fulfillment versus the more touch point, more for-hire trucking intensive parcel movements associated with e-commerce.
Thank you, Jason. And with that, we've come to the end of our show. We hope you enjoyed it and you can put the data to good use. If you'd like your copy of all the data and more in-depth breakdowns of everything we covered today and more, you can get this month's 30-day reset. And again, last time, that is provided down below. Come on back and see us next time for another all-new 30-day reset. Until then, thanks for watching. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. We're back here every month with more 30-day reset. If you can't get enough and you need more content before then, you can check out this video right here. That one's selected especially for you. Or hey, why don't you check out this playlist up here from my buddy Dave and his show, Digging Deeper. See you next time. Bye.